right, gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Unfair Fight. This one a little bit different than normal. I know we were planning to record one today, but we decided to make the sucker live because turns out there's another exchange technique. I know we had been suspicious about this for many weeks, but we figured we might as well make this episode live, in case folks were nervous or concerned or wanted a little bit of insight into how this thing works, how to protect themselves. I also like to talk a little bit about kind of some lessons learned from the Uber hack and a bit on kind of malware being deployed as ISO files as well. I think this is a attack technique we're seeing quite a bit. But, to kick it off, X or David, give us a little 1-2 on maybe the original, exchange exploit and this kind of follow-on. Obviously, we always get worried about follow-on techniques when we see solid exploits. They usually have these tentacles that spread and create other vectors. So can you just give like a layman's term, high-level kind of overview of it, and then we'll maybe dig into a little bit of what we were seeing weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. This new zero-day exchange exploit is very similar to the proxy logon techniques that were, patched up as of this year into last year too. So there's good news and bad news on this one. The good news is there's a lot of the behaviors and tactics that are used post breach are the same. They're looking to drop web shells in the same type as directories. I even posted up some Yara rules that Rebel, who's on here, our reverse engineer, was able to use with some forensic images that he was messing with that really let us unearth web shells a lot quicker than running that PowerShell script that's been floating around, because that thing takes forever. Right. Yeah. So I highly suggest to use the Yara ones. But ideally what happens here, going back to like the proxy logon, is in this case, there's an exploit post authentication. So that means after someone already has access to the on-prem exchange server through like OWA. What they're able to do is they're able to remotely trigger another exploit after that initial logon, which allows them to drop down files in the exchange IIS directories, hence how the web shells get on there. Then they use these web shells to run commands, because then they're running as a system process IIS on the machine, and they're able to use this web shell to further run PowerShell commands. What we see usually afterwards is what they like to run is credential dumping tools like Mimikatz, or they like to, we've seen another technique that's been popular because, Mimikatz gets caught by, 99 out of 100 AVs. What they'll do is they'll actually grab the NT-DIT, like auth AD files out of like shadow copies. And we know a lot of people out there are running Exchange and Active Directory on the same server. This is where it kind of like gets really dangerous. Yeah.
Please don't, but we see it all the time.
We do see it a lot, yeah. And so then if they find that out, then they're like, it's like double win, right? It's win-win, bonus time there. So yeah, they're able to use these shells to just run any code that they want remotely on the machine. And it's very hard to detect this. We know historically that AVs have trouble with web shells. They've gotten better due to the recent, due
to the exchange, like the first one.
Yeah, they've gotten better at it, but still, it is very tricky sometimes. And what we've seen, if we look at the article that came out from GTSC, I believe it was, or GT something,
GTSC,
solid work by them, by the way. Well done.
Yeah, solid, yeah,
massive, yeah.
That this threat actor that was abusing this was actually overriding legit. ASPX or the IS files that run on the web server, legit ones with some legit code and then a little bit of a backdoor section in it. So that makes it a little trickier, hence running like the Yara rules, because those can actually get inside of there and be like, okay, this is not correct, So I would highly suggest anyone just to audit. There's not many files in the directories of Exchange for OWA and the HTTP proxy that's in front of OWA. So I would highly suggest just to poke through that a little bit and, look for any sections that are calling out weird JavaScripts or just anything you don't know. You could even run hashes of them, compare the hashes against known Exchange stuff, because usually this doesn't change pending custom modifications you do. There's some other mitigations Microsoft also posted overnight, which kind of mirror what GTSC did. Hats off to them. I see it a lot in the industry. People will give out these exploits, then they're like, done. So hats off for them to actually give everyone a mitigation opportunity.
I don't see that Microsoft had a scramble on this, and again, well done getting something out.
Yeah,
so quickly.
Microsoft's mitigation is similar to what they what GTSC put out there was to stop was to rewrite certain IIS rules. I won't go too deep; it's just kind of nerdy, but they'll have mitigation steps on it to make sure that this is a temp workaround that blocks it while they get a patch out. And then another thing to do too is which wasn't highlighted in the GTSC, but Microsoft did, was just to double check you don't got WinRM PowerShell open to the internet port 5985, 5986. Just make sure that you got that locked to 443 only. Because once they get in, and they have the creds, they can also start doing remote PowerShell with that, with those ports being open. And that's just unfolds even harder with that one. So that's just a little 1-2 on that. I don't think I missed anything, David. Did I?
No, I mean, I think the biggest interest piece for me out of what GTSC put was the fact that the web shell they found was Chinese based. I mean, we've seen that a lot, right? That all the APT, like the nation state Chinese groups, and even the groups like Hafnium, they're all using the same web shell. So I know we had some similar research into, we saw some data when we were investigating a customer, and hopefully Rebel can talk about that. But we speculated the same thing. We were like, is this Chinese nation state? Is it the Hafnium group coming back a bit different? Because we keep finding these guys everywhere.
We were, for those that don't know, we were hyper suspicious probably for the past month that there was a new technique. The problem was when we got here's the good news. The post exploit activity, it's still all really similar, right? We were seeing launch, persisted scheduled tasks on other machines, laterally spread, stealing privileged creds. It's actually catching the follow-on activity post exploit was actually pretty easy. It wasn't too terribly difficult. In the particular customer we were dealing with was definitely one that we believe gets a lot of nation state attention, and we were hyper suspicious. But the forensic image we were given, unfortunately, had already clearly had some mitigation that it seemed like in cleaning, so it kind of eliminated the evidence we needed to basically come out publicly and confirm. So we can't really go on our gut feel, even though it turned out to be right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So
as much as I wanted to.
I think what is
I
nice,
knew I had a gut post auth. There's some post auth thing because what we saw. At least
that was the first thing you said. The first day, but this is a post auth exploit.
Yeah, there's a post auth exploit, and we could see that they were abusing the PowerShell endpoint similar to proxy shell, but the server was all patched. We double checked that. Of course, that's the first thing we checked.
But I think what's good for us is that we're not living in a state of unknowing. I think it would have killed us to say, well, we've got something here. We know it's bad. We've stopped it. But what is it?
Right.
Constantly spending each day going, has anyone found any more about this?
This is pretty much for us been a daily topic. Is there any other thing we can pull out of here to get confirmation? Because, generally when a machine gets owned, and at least our software is running on it, and we don't know how they got in, I've never seen a case where it wasn't an exploit.
Same.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
poor Rebel, right? I mean, I'm
the APG.
Rebel obviously
still is,
saving some of the sensitive bits. Tell us a little bit about kind of, how you started digging in, and even with the data we were able to scrape together, with this image, how you kind of got to the state where we were starting to confirm, this is looking the same.
Yeah, just coming, I just started working here, and all of a sudden it's boom, we're hit with this this huge
good time.
It's a good time.
Yeah, it's great. I'm coming from a vulnerability research background, so jumping into different forensics was interesting. So having these images and just really digging deep, I spent a lot of time just searching every corner of those images, and I'm glad I didn't stop, because I could have stopped pretty early, but I knew something was there. Very suspicious seeing that Microsoft Exchange PowerShell app pool running. Knew something was there. So, this has been pretty interesting.
Because as John said, right, the image that we got had clearly been cleaned up. So you were able to pull the. So you mentioned that you found the PowerShell exploitation. Was that was in the logs, right?
Well, that was actually from our agent. You could see all the child processes were coming from that worker process, and that alone was hey, what is this? This is different. This is a little different from the previous proxy shell exploit. So we knew something was very, very fishy here.
Right.
Right.
I think it raises a bigger question, which is kind of from an IT architecture standpoint. If we want to, obviously, we all know most folks are tending to move their Exchange servers to Azure hosted, Exchange, which, the cloud is something that's interesting to me. I think odds are you tend to see less exploitation. It's more secure than people trying to run everything on-prem. However, someday there'll be a cloud event and that'll be a hell of a lot worse, right? It's a little bit of a house of cards when it goes sideways. But I would say, and guys, tell me if you disagree, but my belief is the customers at least from our view, right? And we have a lot of on-prem Exchange servers, probably thousands. The ones that try to run full on-prem domains, full on-prem Exchange, still run a DMZ, still run traditional remote VPN access, I feel like they get exploited more often and more effectively by the adversary than those that have moved to trying to get a lot of the workload into the cloud and a little bit, bifurcated. What do you guys think? I mean, obviously, that's kind of like the completely obvious advice is accelerate your plans
I
to
mean,
move those workloads. But what do you guys think?
I'd agree with you. I think there's obviously a justification. There's a reasoning behind why organizations choose to do it. But if you can avoid it, if you can move forward and start moving towards cloud-based infrastructure, you absolutely should. I think the biggest problem with having it on-prem, one, as we always talk about, mapping your infrastructure. You have it on-prem and people don't keep up to date with what's actually in their environment and what systems they're actually running. And then on top of that, the patching of those systems, you will find that the person that owned it no longer works here, or there'll be n number of excuses as to why those systems haven't been kept up to date. Whereas when they're in cloud-based repositories or cloud-based, you tend to find that either updates are pushed automatically because they've got constant connectivity, or there's n number of reasons why those systems are more secure. I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all, but a lot of extra work is going into protecting cloud-based infrastructure. We all know it's the future and we know it's the way forward. And so I think companies and even security professionals now being hired, it's one of their top concerns and the thing that they ask themselves first and foremost.
Right. Yeah, if you look back in history, I think, my opinion, what I've been telling folks is we as an industry, and obviously, we serve predominantly the managed IT service provider industry, need to move to a point where when you have your on-prem infrastructure, there is nothing listening at the boundary. No VPN, no ports, no DMZ. And people will say, well, that's crazy. That doesn't really work. But if you think about it, look back to what was another kind of boundary-based exploit that created absolute havoc on the ransomware. This was I think it was an SL vulnerability in the Pulse Secures, the FortiGates,
and Pulse
that allowed a remote code execution technique where, a threat actor can get onto these devices. It's not like there's antivirus or anything else running on these, appliances, and it allowed them to get clear text passwords of anyone that is logged in. So when you kind of host these services on the boundary of your network, first off, most people mess up the firewall rules in their DMZ. So if you pop one of those servers, I mean, I swear 50% of the time in our customer base, you can get to the domain controller from it, which is really not how you're supposed to do it. And you kind of have to account for humans making mistakes here. But the point is, anytime you're running a service externally facing, and there's kind of one step to potentially get into the kind of the inside of the network where you can get to the DC, you can work to, steal credentials and expand your access, you're just a 0 day away from having a panic event. And so this is why I think I really like to see more adoption. And maybe the tech isn't fully there, but I've seen some great solutions for zero trust remote access. So if you can get your Exchange stuff, you can get all those DMZ servers in the cloud, anything that doesn't need to be on your domain, like disassociate it, from your domain and host it separate. I really think it brings down the attack surface quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
But the reality is, in my opinion, when an adversary lands a network, no matter if it's a new exploit, or they're phishing, everything they're doing post exploitation to spread and achieve their objective, whether it's to nation state steal data or ransom group to create havoc and extort. It's a lot of the same techniques I've seen in the past 12 years. Stealing creds, using WMIC, using PSExec, using WinRM, and spreading around scheduled tasks and normal persistent stuff in some cases. So, I think the lesson learned I take from this one is, if the VPN vulnerability wasn't enough, the exchange vulnerability wasn't enough, this follow-on exchange vulnerability is enough. Like, how much more motivation do you need to accelerate your move to a more hybrid style environment?
Right.
I think that's like, the best lesson. The good news is we're pretty well positioned. I think we found one other server last night. I just read the overnight notes when I got up this morning. That looked like it was exploited with this technique, but by and large, we haven't seen much.
But as you said, the tradecraft is the same even after the exploitation. Maybe that's Monday's task, Rebel. Maybe we should make the largest decision tree going of tradecraft techniques. If you see X, we know they're going to do Y, and just give that to the SOC.
Yeah. So anything else on the exchange topic? I wanted to hit that one first, and hence why we did this live, just because I know we had a lot of curious folks. Before we kind of move on.
I have nothing else besides I think you put it in a good light. If you don't need the on-prem infrastructure, I know most of our customer base can struggle with it. If you can't, manage it, keep it up to date. No one can really keep their ear to the ground that much these days. We know how, in our SMB customer space where everyone's multi-headed, it can be hard just to, hop on and check the news at least once a day, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I should have patched an hour ago. That's it. I'm done. So,
right.
it really shows that the need to kind of give it some thought. And if you do want to run it on premise, just know your attack surface and how you could, know what's the most critical things for attack surfaces like exchange servers. Someone in the Discord the other day was like, man, something about exchange servers are pretty much production honeypots these days. That made me laugh.
I don't know who said
like
that.
having a hide pop.
I need to go look up. They need credit for that one. That one kind of made me laugh.
Yeah.
Last night when I was reading.
So you just know what you're running on that. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on those.
I think for me, it's again just a massive hats off to GTSC for a fantastic write-up and for bringing it to light for the community, to be honest.
Yep.
And not putting a GitHub link with the exact exploit.
Yeah, exactly. And not just leaving it with, this is something bad and we'll show you how to do it. It's actually talking about the mitigation. They've really done their research and tried to both identify and protect.
People put out exploit code when it's just like the industry can't respond fast enough to patch and mitigate. So all you're doing is giving the adversary a head start. I mean, I absolutely can't stand it. I think it's, everyone does it for their security street cred, but I think it's not actually genuinely in the interest of security when you do things like that. So really hats off to those guys. Maybe let's switch gears. Obviously, we obviously feel super bad for any company that finds themselves in a situation, like Uber was the previous week. But, so this is not about, bashing Uber or anything. We know some of the folks over there, and in a lot of cases, they do some really good work and try hard. What lessons learned did we see? What did we learn from the public write-ups on that hack, and kind of maybe give a little quick summary of how it went down based on our knowledge, and just any advice for those listening.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway from this is that while MFA is great and it does work, don't get me wrong, we push MFA and no one should go, oh, well, they got around MFA or they used MFA to gain access. We shouldn't install it because it's more hassle than it's worth. That's not what we're saying. In this incident, what happened is a contractor with access to Uber's internal network had their credentials stolen and sold on the dark web, purchased, and then a technique called MFA fatigue was used. And what that is let's say I've got my little mobile here. It's constantly getting push requests. It's constantly
trick him into saying okay.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
So maybe you're already connected and you think your session is timed out, and so you get another push request, and it just constantly keeps getting sent. So at some point, this poor contractor has clicked accept, either thinking it's themselves or that it's just having a bit of a moment, and this young I'm going to say young lad from the UK has gained access to the internal infrastructure. Fortunately, he's been arrested. So, it's not like this is one of those ones that's undetectable and untraceable. But that's all it was. That's it. It's not poor security practices.
Right? What they do after that? I mean, that's what I'm kind kind of curious.
From the sounds of it, nothing. They were able to get records for the internal systems. They were able to view the SentinelOne security dashboard, the VMware vSphere control panel itself.
That's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's the critical infrastructure. So they could have brought down
the control panel.
Yeah, they could have brought down Uber's infrastructure. What they didn't get access to was the public-facing infrastructure, things like the credit card details and all of those pieces. Because again, it seems like Uber follows good security practices and segregates their public and their private infrastructure.
Now, is this on like a Windows side of their infrastructure? You know, because a lot of these big SaaS companies, you know, run a heavy Nix flavor. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not too sure.
Do you know X?
That detail wasn't released as far as I'm aware.
So this is kind of one of those weird ones where you get almost an unprecedented view inside of what the hacker's doing, because he posted so much stuff about what they did and what they are currently doing. But there was screenshots of them on a Windows device. And they were on a Windows device, and then they posted screenshots of them in the Slack channel for Uber saying, "You guys have been hacked." And I think everyone thought it was a joke, and there's like 200 emojis on his post, but no, it was legit. And he posted the screenshot of this thing and of that online. So you know, they almost got kind of lucky, honestly, that it was just kind of a kid for laughs. This could have been really bad.
Well,
if it was like a professional like crime group, I mean, this could.
Well, no,
I think
Oh, sorry. They did say that the teenager potentially had links to the Lapsus group, who operate out of Russia. So they're a Russian cybercrime group who have done similar things in the past, like similar threat operations in the past. But it's not confirmed whether or not he's an actual member of that group. Just potentially links on the dark web.
Right. I think the one kind of takeaway I got from that one is just kind of educating more. MFA, obviously we push it all the time. We want people to use it, but you know, what's kind of interesting in the this particular, you know, when we were very suspicious that there was a new 0-day in exchange, you know, there's a lot more activity around this, and we believe it was all the threat actor. Now we don't have 100% proof, so we'll probably come out with a bit more of a write-up later, but you know, based on what I saw, it seems like not only did they try and get an exchange, they seem to do essentially, you know, kind of a 365 Microsoft 365 login attack. There was supposedly MFA on in these counts, and they got by it. Obviously, our new cloud response product was really good at picking it up, so we stopped it right away. So, you know, and then we believe they moved on to also try and hit the service provider as well to continue their activity. So when you look at it, when you see activity like that, that was immediately, it's like, I haven't seen a ransomware group operate this way in a coordinated fashion in this sort of time zone. I think that's when we knew we were dealing with someone different, like immediately. But I think the one takeaway is you can always trick a human once. In these kind of MFA push notification things, like if there's something to focus on your, you know, if you use, you know, that style for MFA authentication, there's one area to focus on education of your employees. It would be on how to not, you know, how to recognize this type of attack, because it's a really fast way. You know, the MFA, the push notifications are super convenient. They're fantastic, but boy, they can cut both ways. From a convenience and, you know, efficacy standpoint.
I'm definitely more of a fan of when I log in for any kind of MFA, I've got to go into the credentials myself, and if it times out, it times out. I just have to redo it myself.
Damn annoying codes that change when you just about have the code in. They didn't write enough buffer on the code. Man, that makes me irritated every time.
And then you mess it up anyways. You're like, oh man.
It's really does anyone ever don't give you enough like buffer time from the previous code, and it's like, shit, I just totally missed it by like a second, and I can start over. It irritates the hell out of me.
In the UK, we have a show called Countdown. I don't know if you have that in the US, but they do number problems and word problems. And the final couple of seconds, it has this one particular interest.
Wait, number and word problems in the U.S. on a TV show? Are you kidding me? Who the hell's gonna watch that?
But the final piece
gonna watch
of it,
that in the United States.
Well, with a couple of seconds to go, it's and that's what goes through my head every time I see those things ticking out. It's the countdown.
Can I do it in time? I make sure I got a keyboard with the 10 key, man, so I can do it fast. It's challenge accepted. I got 3 seconds left. I'm not doing that top bar stuff. I got the 10 key.
Is that it? When you're too busy to video game, that's how you get your kicks. You wait, last 5 seconds, and that's
right. I always wait for the last 3 seconds.
Right.
But yeah, you know what? And another good takeaway from going back to the MFA fatigue, right. And this group, I believe, I can't remember the other companies they hit, but they've also done the same thing to them, the same tactic. So it's a tactic that's gaining big legs, and we know this. But what they'll do afterwards too is they'll add a new MFA device. So they already, so they'll get in once, then they'll add a secondary MFA device to that person's account, so they don't need their MFA code anymore. They got their own.
I'd be curious if anyone looked to see if they were using app passwords too, and adding app passwords.
They could do that.
Sucker in. That'd be another clever one.
That's another clever one too. Yeah, to get to emails.
Not to give new ideas, but
I know, right?
I'm just thinking things to go look for. If like someone had gotten in, I would go check your app passwords.
In
365.
Should be part of everybody's compromised, especially 365 accounts, but any account is just wipe all the redo MFA for that user. Just wipe all the devices out of there, redo it. As you do their password too.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if you got a successful kind of MFA bypass attack, and the first thing you did was once you logged in, create an app password and launched Outlook on a normal machine? Because half these, what we've noticed, half the malicious logins to 365, they're clearly coming through a proxy, or they try and log into 5 accounts from the same IP. But man, you go and put it on just a normal VM, maybe hosted in the US, and you got kind of Outlook running, it would be pretty stealthy. I don't think a lot of pickets. So maybe one good takeaway from this: check your damn app passwords.
Check your app, or if you host it in Azure. Okay, I'm done giving you tips.
All right, we're done. We're gonna move on. Let's just finish this up with we're seeing a big increase in obviously ISO files, right? And being part of the initial dropper.
Huge.
Who wants to take the torch on walking us through and walking the audience through how this style attack works and what to look out for?
I'm happy to do it unless Extra Rebel wants to. All right. I spent a lot of time doing looking at this and trying to solve that problem.
I think you guys have been deep in ISO files recently, probably the pros. We've been catching it nonstop and dissecting.
It's everywhere. We're seeing it being used by a lot of prevalent malware like CatBot and other ones because of how successful it is. So the way this works is a .iso file. If any of our listeners remember CD-ROM drives. What happens with those when you put them on the machine is they get mounted to the drive internally. Those drives have now been virtualized. So what happens is a .iso usually contains an executable and the DLLs and everything that is needed to install the software that's contained on it. With the virtualized systems, we now have packaging around executable files that are almost able to self-load. When I say almost able to, what I mean is you still have to double-click that ISO file, but the executable embedded inside will launch once the ISO file is mounted. Thank God Microsoft cleaned up auto-mounting. So it used to be if you popped an ISO file onto the machine, it would auto mount and run straight away. Yep. Yeah, that no longer happens. So what CatBot and these other ones do is they trick you into thinking you're downloading a PDF or an Excel or a JPEG or something that you really want. Actually, it's a .iso. The extension is hidden. And when you double click it, it loads the executable onto the drive and then runs and does everything that a normal executable would do. Now, the reason why this is not being detected by AV is because ISO files are not typically a valid scan type. Because unlike a Packer, which still leaves the MZ header at the top, that 4D5A, ISOs have a completely different header type, and so don't actually get registered by the AV product. What they would have to do is unpack the ISO file and then scan the executables within. So this is why it's been such a big problem.
They also pad them a bunch too, right? They'll make the
haven't we seen some large ISO files?
I was about to say they're like 350 megabytes sometimes.
Well, that's it. Your standard, your standard AV product won't really do anything over 55 to kind of 65 megabytes because
what they do is it's all junk too. So they'll send like a PZIP or a zip file, and it compressed it's like a megabyte, but uncompressed it's 300 megabytes.
Yeah, that's it. And we see that. We're seeing that quite a bit. So we found a really elegant way of stopping it, which, I'm happy to to share our code with our customers. I would share it with the wider community, but I don't know how I feel about that at the moment. And because the second we share it is the second people start working around it, and I'm not happy with that idea. But yeah, that's basically what it is.
Security, right?
Yeah, that's it. But that's effectively what it is. It's still the same underlying executables and problems that we're seeing. You know, there's nothing.
And all the post-exploitation activity would be the same. It's just a really clever.
Exactly.
What does it look like to the end user who's getting phished? You know,
it looks like the standard phishing email. It looks like your invoice.
Like what are the attachments?
It was Snapchat.iso. I was like Snapchat.iso. How the?
Yeah.
Because I felt like I've seen some where they try to not make it look like an ISO file. Right?
Yeah, we've seen it where it looks like a JPEG or it looks like a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. You know, the standard human phishing tactics of, oh, here's your invoice or pay rises 2023 and you know, the things that entice you to click, but
tax
they don't
documents, invoices, POs.
I think
that's the thing.
The most recent one we did. Yeah, the most recent one we had, I don't even think that was disguised as anything. I think it was just a straight up ISO file. Like, I think it's more like a pretext. Like, what are they saying to the end user that is making them fully trusting? Yeah. So
yeah.
And they come from, you know, we've seen them come from email and from phishing links too. We had a big one. We had one that was actually doing some tactics we haven't seen before. It was completely different than the normal ISO stuff we've seen before. And I think that one came from like a phishing link, I believe, and an email, then a link to download.
Right.
Was that the one where they were trying to download a toolbar? Was that the one you've been looking at, Rebel?
One,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting one. You spent a fair bit of time working on that, so.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one.
It still does some weird stuff. Sometimes, you know what's funny, to pull back the sheet on the reverse engineering. Sometimes these people don't even know what they're doing when they're coding stuff, and it throws you for a loop. You're like, why'd they run that command? But they don't even know why they coded that command in there. So you're like, you're thinking there's some like 200 IQ move going on here, but they just mistyped something.
It's when you take a look at it, right?
200 IQ. Isn't that hilarious? Isn't that like this is every time we've dealt with some customers where we'll have an event and their mind immediately goes to, it's like all 200 IQ moves that the adversary make. And 9 times out of 10, it's like not a 200 IQ move. It's the same old shit, but everyone's looking for the conspiracy. You know what I mean? It's always good to start with the basics because the basics will lead you to the 200 IQ move, but you don't want to skip the first part in your analysis and your threat hunt.
It's when someone's just mistyped something that they pulled from Stack Overflow. That's usually what it is.
Yeah, there's
yeah.
You know what? Too?
Oh, go ahead.
I was about to say, you know what? Kind of an interesting thought around these ISO increases is that it really happened around the same time Microsoft said they're going to stop macros by default.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah, and so you can see where the hackers shifted to. They're like, okay, well, whatever. We'll just move on to the next. Macros. If they kept macros, those are easier to detect than these ISOs. So it probably would have been better just to keep the macros. It's kind of an interesting, weird, fallout, from this stuff.
You can't get them sometimes. You can defeat an adversary and then watch them pivot to something that was like you didn't really expect them to try and stay in the game. Where it's like going like we saw one where we smoked them everywhere in the places where we were with our agents, and they immediately went to the SAN because they had access to a machine we weren't on. It was kind of clever. Sometimes you can see them pivot, and it makes you ask, well, why didn't you do that the first time? You could have spent like a tenth the amount of time instead of having to spread through a whole network and be noisy as hell.
I think that's the problem, though, isn't it? They'll burn that technique, and then people get wise to them. They want to save it for when they actually need it.
When they need it, yeah. One thing I'm always there's always like kind of two main approaches, to kind of catching hackers that I see from a technology development. Like some people just are hardcore going after the malware, the behavior of the malware on that box, how it persists, reboots, how it does C2 and things like that. But, the job of whether it's nation states or kind of criminal groups is to have a piece of malware or a technique. Maybe it doesn't even involve malware like the Black Cat group does for a lot of their operations. That evades those malware detection tools. That's why I always tell people there's really two distinct areas. There's kind of the tradecraft or behavior, and that's the part that hasn't changed in so many years. And that's like the really the fundamentals. I mean, when you land a network, you still have to figure out where you are. You still have to figure out where creds you are. You don't just magically see other subnets, especially if it's an on-prem style infrastructure. And there's all that stuff you have to figure out. And so that's why I always think these two worlds have to come together. That's why our stuff is, that we do is always orchestrated with an anti-malware product as well. So the two can work together so you can get a complete view. Because if you think about it, we caught this, 0-day. Turned out, we were highly suspicious of 0-day exchange exploit, but we caught the activity like right away. The post exploitation activity, and same with kind of the Black Cat crew and others that are using free trials of RMMs or other products. Hopefully, our industry now believes they do that. I know some folks claimed it was a non-event, non-story, didn't exist, was fake until Microsoft wrote about it a month after we did.
We're still seeing it. We're still seeing those exact same patterns.
We caught an ISO doing it.
Really?
Yeah.
Which is very abnormal.
So maybe I just want to end it on this couple things to look out for that we've observed when you're dealing with the groups that are going to use live off the land techniques very heavily. So things like free trials of software deployment technology or network scanning devices, or they're using PDQ deploy. If you see a second RMM, a remote monitoring management, pop on. What we've noticed, so we respond to one where the bad guys put the same RMM on that, and it was almost more of a remote screen connect style, thing. But when they put the second one on, that one was running as a compromised user account where the real one's running a system. So it's always a good, if you're running an RMM in your environment and, you want to kind of monitor yourself, I would say that is that can be a dead giveaway that you have some bad stuff going on. Because if you're catching a ransomware because your tool caught the act of the ransom trying to happen, odds are you're going to get beat most of the time. And you've missed the 12 steps prior. So that's why I think it's really important to have those kind of two worlds come together with a huge focus on the, the privileged activity. I mean, that's, unless you have an exploit and you want to move to another computer, you're going to have some sort of privileged capability there. Any other, parting shots, guys? I want to, obviously we never do these live, but I wanted to make this one live just to cover the exchange activity. Anything else? Any other lessons learned you want to get across to the audience?
No, I think we've kind of discussed our feelings and thoughts on it. I will say one selfish plug from the APG perspective is where we discussed the toolbar and the ISOs. We've got a paper coming out on that, a write-up coming out in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that, because we're going to be discussing the malware that it did, as well as the ISO technique itself. So if anyone's interested.
And some unique stuff that it did that we haven't seen. We still haven't really seen otherwise. So it's unique to at least whoever this group was. And this group was hard to attribute. So should be a good article. It's not going to be the normal ISO Goot loader, Quackbot stuff. It's actually a different one.
Good.
Yeah, it's something new. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm sure
well done. I'll make one plug for you guys. For anyone listening, if you have an Exchange server, you're concerned it's been owned, or you think it's been owned, and you want APG to take a look, I mean, we can absolutely reach out to us, and we can help you wrap your mind around it quickly, and maybe fill in some gaps and find some new techniques maybe no one's seen yet.
I spent all last night looking at ASPX files to make sure that there wasn't any hidden sneaky ones in our customers going on. So
well, that's the stuff we love.
Check out anything.
All right, gents. Well, thanks for your time, and thanks to everyone that's listening. And again, reach out if we can be of assistance. We know what these techniques look like, and it's pretty easy to catch the post-exploitation activity. But if you have any questions, concerns, or you have some forensics images we have our adversary pursuit group, for those that don't know, has two primary missions: threat intelligence reporting and rapid prototyping. All right. So as part of the threat intelligence, we have Robel and a whole reverse engineering capability so that we can stay up to speed and make sure that goes into our innovation feedback loop to get back out into the our productized offerings. So with that, gents, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Robel.
We'll wrap this episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Robel.
It's the first podcast I've ever done.
There we go.
Perfect.
Many more to come. You'll become a regular on this one.
Yeah,
awesome.
You'll be the brains. Whenever I'm stumbling up and talking too salesy, you can stop me and be like, actually.
All right, guys. We'll see you. Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.